Hi, my name is Todd Cole, and I am the professor of educational psychology at Westminster College. And today I'm going to be introducing the 4 domains of teaching through Charlotte Danielson's textbook, and also all the theorists that go along with education and how they started with Dewey all the way through Vygotsky. And then I'll be also talking about parent-teacher templates for conferences, and then the lesson plan template as well. But to begin, let's look over here at the 4 domains of teaching. When I go up to the first one, domain 1 is planning and preparation. And the key word you can see up there on an index card is being an expert in your field. So if you are the science teacher, you need to be an expert in the field of science and so forth. But there are several components within planning and preparation of domain 1. Letter A is demonstrating your knowledge of content and pedagogy, which is what we just talked about. Be an expert. Know everything that you need to know about the field in which you're going to teach from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. And if it changes within the school year, you have to learn about it as well. Letter B is demonstrating knowledge of students. That means, how did they do the year before? Do they have an IEP or a 504 plan? What is their culture? What is their family situation? What are some of their interests? All of that is going to help you plan and prepare for your school year and for every single lesson that you're going to do within the classroom. And that will change from year to year. You might have a whole year of football players, and the next year you might have a large group of musicians. So your planning and preparation may change from year to year. Letter C is setting instruction outcomes, and let's go to D too, designing coherent instruction. And that's important in that how you are going to set goals. What do you want them to know at the end of a lesson, at the end of a unit, at the end of the school year, so that they can move on to the next grade level? Knowledge of resources like computers, technology, use of smart boards, games, literature within the classroom, all different types of resources that you can use to make your lesson plans more engaging. And then finally, designing student assessments. How are you going to design an assessment that will go with what you're teaching? Often, and I suggest that you do this, make the assessment before you start to teach, so that you know what you need to cover by what you have created in your assessment. And when you make an assessment, it's real important that you ask the children to self-evaluate each question. So if it's worth 6 points for question number 1, ask them, how many points do you think you deserve out of the 6 points? And they self-evaluate. It's also important in assessments to give choices. So say you have 8 questions on the test, but you allow them to do just question 1 or 2. So let them choose which question they think they can answer the best out of question 1 or 2. When you give them choices, you're giving them responsibility, and they have ownership for their assessment. So that's domain 1, being an expert in your field, planning and preparation. If we move on to domain 2, and it's the classroom environment, and that's where we want to use the key word safe. How is the child or all the students going to feel safe in that classroom so that they'll be the most productive student possible? Let's look up there, letter A, creating an environment of respect and rapport. That has to start from day 1. Sometimes you'll do many activities that first week or even month in order to develop that respect and rapport between yourself and the student, between yourself and the parents, and so forth. You might be able to develop respect and rapport by being at the door and shaking their hand at the beginning of every day. and greeting them with a smile. You might be able to do it by having a schedule at the board, and so the kids have that safety blanket. This is what I'm going to do for the day when I walk into Mr. Cole's room. I'm going to read the schedule and see what I need to accomplish all day long. That develops a respect and rapport between the teacher and student if you have that continuity and routine established from day one. Establishing a culture of learning. You can do that through your routines, but you can also talk about the culture of your classroom. Do you have Asian? Do you have African American? Do you have Jewish? Make sure that your classroom culture matches the culture of your kids. Letter C, managing classroom procedures. This is going to help you to create less or hinder bad behavior when you have established a classroom of procedures. And you can do that by creating a routine, creating the plan at the board of what you're going to do all the time, and also by how you're going to set up your room, letter D. Are you going to have the kids in pods where they're going to be able to cooperate and collaborate with one another? Are you going to have them in groups of 2? Are you going to have them in rows? Are you going to switch it up? Even within the same lesson, you can move desks around so that you can create a physical space that's also safe. So the kids aren't tripping over cords. There's a way to get someone who's in a wheelchair safely to their room and safely out of the room. Same goes for establishing kids who may have hearing disorders. Where are they going to sit in the classroom? Preferably close enough so they can see the screen, preferably close enough where they can hear you if you don't have auditory microphones and so forth. So setting up your classroom, the environment, is very important to have the kids learn the best way they can. If we move on to domain 3, which is instruction. And the key word here is engage, engage, engage. How are we going to make our lessons so engaging that the kids will want to learn? Communicating with the students. Are you going to let them have some ownership in how the classroom's going to happen? Are you going to allow them to have them in pods and let them pick who they're going to sit next to sometimes? Are you going to allow them to decide what order things are going to go in within the lesson itself? Communicating with them and letting them even take hold of being the teacher, letting them decide on questions that may go with what we're going to talk about. Using questioning and discussion techniques. It's so important that we do not just keep on asking what, or list. And create questions that are deeper, like explain, create, compare and contrast, so that they're becoming thinkers, not just people who spit something out that you have taught and put it back on a piece of paper and then say, okay, I'm done with what I was supposed to do. Engaging students in learning. Maybe it's just going to be coming in a costume for that day. If you're learning about, national parks, maybe you're going to become dressed as a forest ranger or a bear or something that's going to engage them at the beginning of class. Engaging them even by having music being played that goes along with what you're going to do as they enter the classroom. Engaging your students also in mindfulness at the beginning of each lesson, each classroom, or even at the beginning of the day if you're someone who has the kids all day long. 3 minutes of mindfulness can really help you in the rest of the day. After recess, if you want to create mindfulness again, maybe it'll just be think of your favorite thing that we did today and just have them put their heads down and think about that. Using assessment in instruction, I always inform my students, even at the college level, that this is important enough that I am going to be placing it on the test, that there's very little that I'm going to teach you that I don't think is accessible, okay? And also being very mindful that when we engage and use assessment and instruction, that we are going to be careful that it's meaningful. School can be fun, and we want it to be fun, but we want it to be meaningful first. If it's meaningful, it should be fun. And that's really important. And then finally, demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness. What if your lesson isn't going well? You have to be an expert in your field, that you have other resources on the back burner that you can bring up and go in a different direction. Or perhaps you are flexible enough to understand that kids aren't getting it, so we need to stop for a minute and reteach. Sometimes it's just if you repeat the same instruction over again, maybe using a different voice, a softer voice, a louder voice, different vocabulary, sure, in order to help them understand. Or have someone in your class that does understand what's going on, explain it to the rest of the class. When they hear it from a peer, it might make a difference. Okay, so we have expert safety and engagement. We're going to move on to our last domain by Charlotte Danielson, which is domain 4, and it's professionalism. And the key word I want you to remember is being an advocate for every child. Sometimes, as the teacher, you might be the only advocate for that child in his or her life. It's very important. Reflecting on teaching. Sometimes you'll reflect while you're teaching, as I mentioned over here. If it's not going well, you need to change gear and bring something to the plate that you had on the back burner. But it might be at the end of a lesson before you teach it again in the next period or the next year, and say, this went really well. I'm going to keep this part of the lesson, but this didn't go so well, so I'm going to have to scratch that part and add something else to it. Reflecting while you're teaching and then after you're teaching too. And maintaining accurate records. Being a secretary is a really important part. Just knowing how often they're in school, that's going to be a big red flag if your student's missing a lot of school, right? But you have to have the records that prove that. And then, of course, their grades and where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are, and having examples of both so that you can show a parent where they are highlighting in greatness and where they have some weak spots. Communicating with the families, and you'll do that with parent-teacher conferences, through weekly letters, through emails, involving them to come into the classroom. Maybe you have a culture in your classroom that very few of the other students know about, and you want to invite that parent in to explain it and showcase it. Maybe it will be with food from that culture, or stories from that culture, or holidays from that culture. But involve the families to come in and be a part of the classroom. Participating in professional communities. Are you going to belong to certain groups that are going to help you invest in your education as a teacher, to expand your knowledge? And then growing and developing professionally. Both of these, I guess, go together, right? So how are you going to share with the community your expertise and how are you going to grow as an educator as well. And then showing professionalism, dressing appropriately, using vocabulary that's appropriate for your age level of students, modeling behavior that you want them to do. You are going to be the person that is going to showcase how you want them to act so that you can create respect and rapport. You see how all these domains kind of come together as one? There really isn't one that's more important than the other. You might need to defend what you think is the most important and why, but they all overlap, and one helps the other domain become even stronger. So here ends my synopsis of our four domains of Charlotte Danielson for education. So we're back and we're talking about the 5 theorists of education that made a difference in education, and every theorist had some type of input into what today's education is. John Dewey is our first one. The 2 things I want you to remember about John Dewey is that he was progressive and child-centered. Progressive, I mean, he did away with the Little House on the Prairie classroom, where the kids were in rows, the teacher had her desk in front of the kids, and the blackboard was behind her, where there was rote learning and memorization all the time. He was progressive because he did away with those rows and put kids in pods, where the teacher was more of a facilitator and walked around the room, okay? And the teacher wasn't lecturing all the time. Child-centered, meaning that everything that was developed within the school day and school year was because of what the child's interests were. So if you had a lot of baseball players, you had a lot of literature on baseball at the time. You played games for learning that involved baseball, basketball, maybe even shooting a hoop into a net in order to answer a question, something like that. Okay, so the teacher was a facilitator, and learning was active and interactive, and you can do that much more if you're in a pod, right? And you have more hands-on, and you're learning from your peers with the teacher as a facilitator. It must involve the social world and community of the child. So why am I doing what I'm doing, Mr. Cole? The reason you're doing what you're doing is because you'll be able to do it in your social and real world once you leave the classroom. Curriculum must be built on the child's interests, invest in preparation and documentation, and it must be sensitive to the needs of the families. So if you have families who may be extremely poor, you're sensitive to that, and you're supplying them with the materials they may need at home. And we do that now, don't we? We have the backpack program where we provide food for kids on weekends. And we make sure that the kids have pencils and notebook and paper and even literature to read at home. Something to think about. Where would we be if Dewey had not started the new revolution in education? Would we still be in rows? Who knows? Maria Montessori is our next theorist after Dewey, and she was very keen on using the 5 senses in the classroom. Her philosophy is a part of today's classroom, particularly in the preschools. When you walk into a preschool room, you are certain to see everything at eye level for the child. Think about it when you go into the grocery store. What do they have on sale? It's the things that an adult can see at their eye level. And that's what we do in the Montessori classroom. Everything is at eye level for the child. Everything is child-sized, so they aren't sitting in an adult chair where their feet can dangle and go back and forth and back and forth. Everything is child-sized as far as tools. The scissors aren't adult scissors. They need to be the right size. Same with crayons, pencils, and so forth. But they're real tools. Kids in the Montessori classroom are making their own lunches together. So there are tools in making the lunch that are real, and some of them may be sharp. Of course, the teacher is there as a facilitator to help them through that. Sensory play is huge. So you might be learning your letters by drawing them in the sand or on sandpaper, or even in shaving cream if you put shaving cream on your desk and you start to write your math facts in shaving cream. It's the sense of touch when we do that, and even sense of smell when you smell the shaving cream. When they are watering the plants, right, they can touch the leaves of the plants. The water is going into the plant. There's so much that goes in with these responsibilities that a child has in the Montessori classroom. So freedom within limits and large blocks of time. A child in the Montessori classroom can choose among some of the choices that a teacher gives of what they want to do during this large block of time at the beginning of the class time. And every child has his or her own rug that they pull out and unroll. And then all of the parts of the game or the learning activity go on that rug and do not go off the rug and then go into someone else's space. Every child is designated to his or her own space during this large block of time, and there's freedom for them to choose. Let's see, it's orderly. There isn't a lot of decoration, things hanging from the ceiling and every piece of the wall being covered. It's more of a distraction according to the Montessori classroom. So it's very orderly too. The kids are responsible for rolling up their mat and returning it to the spot where they found it, and the same with the games. They will have opportunity to cook and to water plants and so forth, but they'll each have a tray that has a lip on it. So when they do spill the water or whatever it is they're pouring to serve for lunch, it may spill, but it's not going to go off the table because they have these trays that have lips, and they learn to pour it without making the spill eventually. They are also responsible for all items in the classroom. They will be responsible for cleaning everything in the classroom. And there is a scenario at the end of a chapter about Montessori where the parent comes in and says, "Why is my child cleaning the desks and the chairs? I'm not paying my tuition at Montessori classrooms plus my regular taxes to have my child clean everything." Well, that's part of the Montessori method for kids to be responsible for everything that they use in the classroom. So if the parent's upset about that, they're in the wrong type of classroom. Teacher is the facilitator. Multi-age groups, you're going to have kids in third grade with first graders, and they may be able to help a child choose a book that's on their level, help explain something in words that might be more appropriate for that child to learn. There are no grades in the Montessori classroom. Everything is done through observation. A parent will see if a child has mastered a certain task by what they have chosen to put on the floor, on their mat, and so forth. So there are no grades. So it's learning the topic, the skill, without that feeling of, oh, am I going to get a grade for this? There's less pressure. Students are responsible to care for themselves and their surroundings, and everything is in the real world. Something to think about: is curiosity helped or hindered with the Montessori method? Do you think kids are more curious because of the setup of the classroom in Montessori? Or do you think they're more, it's more structured where they don't have that ability to think and expand their curiosity? Something to think about. Erik Erikson is one of my favorite theorists because he's more social emotional. He's less on the cognitive level, but more on the feeling level. And someone that really appreciated Erik Erikson's thoughts was Fred Rogers. and you can see how that would be. Erik Erikson also is from birth till death in 8 different stages. And what's important for you to know is who is most influential in each stage of Erik Erikson. So, in other words, stage 1, the mother is most important. Make sense? Or if there is no mother in the picture, it's that one person. It might be the grandmother. It might be the father. Who is most important? That one person. And then when we go to stage 2, it's the mother and father, or if there's 2 mommies or 2 daddies, it's that next person that's most important. If it's grandmother first, maybe it's grandmother, grandfather in the second stage. Stage 3 is the entire family. So you're bringing siblings in, and they're helping the child become more socially involved in everything that they're doing. Stage 4, the neighborhood, and then we bring in the teacher in stage 4. So this is around the school age, age 5 and 6, all the way up to around 11. And we know that teachers become very important in a child's life, almost even more important than the parent. You know, the parent might be hearing the child say, well, Mr. Cole says, you know, and he knows. You don't know what you're talking about, Mom and Dad. So the teacher becomes very important in stage 4. When we move to stage 5, this is a very important stage. Peers and role models. This is the teen age, where peers in your classroom and role models, say it's a sports figure, a musician that you adore and you look up to, they become most important. And it's during this stage where parents become very concerned. Perhaps the child is dyeing his or her hair or putting in another earring, changing the way they look, wearing clothes that are different. But the teacher can be there to help the parent understand that as long as they aren't hurting themselves or others, as long as their grades aren't being effective, as long as they aren't pulling away from their peers and their family, like just going to their room and closing the door and not wanting to be involved with all of their interests that they once had, as long as those things aren't happening, it's just the stage that they're going through. And when they become an adult, they're going to look back, I can't believe I did that, right? So stage 5 is very important with peers and role models. Stage 6 is your partner that you hopefully are going to establish for a lifetime. And it's that intimacy versus isolation. Now, I tell my students, and I'm telling you now, that I've never been married. So you might say, oh, he's going to have problems with isolation. But if I have all these other steps beforehand, hopefully I have established myself with my peers so that they will help me through this stage where I don't have a partner, where I'll be included in their lives as families. And that did happen for me. Stage 7 is colleagues. And that's when the kids have moved out or have gone to college or have their first job. And the parents are left alone. Well, now what? They look into their jobs and their colleagues, and the colleagues help them find a new interest or maybe become more philanthropic or become more involved in church. Say you could never be the Sunday school teacher because you were bringing up your own kids. Well, now the kids are gone. Maybe this is payback time where you will be more involved in your church. Maybe it's a time where you will be on the school board because you've raised your kids and you want to thank your school district by becoming a part or running for the school board. So being more philanthropic, giving back to society, is that time from age 40 to 65. And then the last one is stage 8, and you look back at your life from 65 until death, and you're saying to yourself, did I make a difference? You might be the grumpy old man because you think, what did I do with my life? But you might be the person that says, hey, I've really given back and had a substantial life in raising my children and helping in society. And when you're 65 or older, you're still going. When my mom was alive, she died at age 85, but from 80 to 85, she was still cooking meals for the church. She was meeting her friends for coffee on Wednesdays uptown at the coffee shop. She was going to church. She was going on vacations with me. She was still very vibrant. You don't stop living after 65. So these are the stages of Erickson. Be mindful that it's mother, father, the entire family, neighborhood and teachers, peers and role models, your partner for life, hopefully, your colleagues, and then yourself. Piaget might be a theorist that you've heard in your past, and he had 4 stages of cognitive development. Stage 1 is the sensory motor stage, from birth to age 2, and they're developing their senses, even their sense of sight when they are a very young person, and they see that they have fingers, and whoa, this is attached to my body. And they just see that, wow, I have different parts of my body that are connected to me. And that's done through visually and through touching. And they're putting things in their mouth that they really shouldn't, but they are learning what's good and what's bad to put in their mouth, and taste and so forth. And the thumb sucking and all those parts are stage 1 of sensory motor. And in this time, there's a key vocabulary word called object permanence. Say you have a child that's in a high chair and they're playing with a stuffed teddy bear, and the teddy bear falls from their tray and they start to cry because they can't see it. They assume it's gone forever. But then the parent will pick it back up and put it back on, and then they might drop it again and start to cry. But eventually, they will learn that even though they can't see it, it's still there. And that's called object permanence. Stage 2 is the pre-operational stage, from ages 2 to 7 years. And they ask a lot of questions like, why? And pretend is huge, and images and words and gestures and symbols for something else. And egocentrism is a key word in this stage. I love teddy bears as a 2-year-old to 7-year-old. And I see my best friend is upset, so I'm going to give him my teddy bear because it makes me feel good when I'm upset or sad. Well, your friend may not like teddy bears, and he might not have the same reaction that you have about teddy bears. And it isn't until you are able to think outside yourself that you begin to realize that, hey, other people have different opinions, and we might have a friend who doesn't like teddy bears like I do. Egocentrism. So you have a big ego still. Okay, we go on to stage 3. Concrete operational is 7 to 11 years old. And that's inductive reasoning. And that's when you have something that's specific that you know and you make a generalization out of it. Say you have a basket of mangoes, and the top 2 are exceptionally ripe. You pick it up and you go, this is a really ripe mango. And you pick another one up. Yeah, it's a really ripe mango. You can make the generalization that all the others are ripe as well. Might not necessarily be true, but that's your generalization, going from specific to general. And then stage 4 is formal operational, and that's 12 years and up. Piaget believed that learning continues all through life, but The philosophy of the 4 stages of cognitive development stopped around 18. Okay, and he has the key word of deductive reasoning, and that's going from general to specific, the exact opposite as inductive reasoning. Something to think about. Will these terms help you in understanding your own children, nieces, or nephews? When you have your own child and they drop something and they start to cry, are you going to start to understand, that's object permanence? Or when you see your child want to give you something that they really, really love, but it's something that you don't really care about, they are experiencing egocentrism because they haven't been able to develop yet that some people have different opinions than myself. So these terms of Piaget might help you as a teacher, but also as a parent or as an uncle or aunt right now. Our last theorist is Lev Vygotsky. What makes him unique and exceptional from the other theorists is that he didn't have the same background of education that the other theorists did, but yet he had so much to contribute to what we call our educational system today. He had a community of language. He believed kids learn through play. He thought recess was very important. Some schools are doing away with recess completely, but that's where vocabulary can be used and challenged. When kids are playing with one another, they learn to share and so forth and work with other age levels. There might be 3rd and 4th graders out at recess at the same time, and they can play with each other even though they aren't in the same classroom. He believed in zone of proximity. This, if you envision a circle or a dartboard, the very center is what a child can do by his or herself without any help. Then the next circle that's outside what the child can do on his or herself is what a child can be successful in with some type of help from a peer or someone older that's more knowledgeable. So what a child can do by his or herself, and then what a child can do with some help from someone who's more knowledgeable, peer or an older person, a teacher. The outside circle is what a child just cannot do yet, even with help from someone else. The frustration level is too great. So there's 3 levels: self, what a child can do with help, and what a child just isn't ready to do at all. Zone of proximity. Scaffolding is another term that Lev Vygotsky was huge in implementing into the educational system. And if you just think of a scaffold that's helping to paint a house, or even in Old Main, we had a scaffold that went all the way up to the top of the building, and it just helped to wash and clean the bricks on the outside. And it would move and be able to help be successful in cleaning the entire building, not just the bottom. But so picture yourself using a scaffold in learning. Something to think about is, why was recess important? What made Vygotsky unique from other theorists? You know that he didn't have the same background, but recess was important because they learned to share and they learned to use vocabulary in the real world. Something to think about. Having a parent-teacher conference template is very important in order to keep your conference on target. And the very first thing you want to do is, of course, welcome the parent. You have to remember that parents have either taken time off from their workplace or had to get a babysitter, so that you want to thank them for coming and welcome them. Then, for the second thing you want to do is ask the parent to really start the conference. What concerns do they have? They may have something that they want to get off their chest, and they aren't going to listen to anything else in this template until they have had their chance to speak. So let them do that at the beginning. If it's something that can be addressed later in the template, then you can say, oh, we're going to be talking about that. Thank you for bringing that up. But let them start with their concerns. Then, as the teacher, start with the strengths that a child has. And make sure you have examples of that strength. Hopefully you're keeping a portfolio of what the child has been doing before the parent-teacher conference. So have examples of what they do well. Then talk about their weaknesses. And again, have examples of what they are struggling with and where their weaknesses lie. Then talk about what you have tried. We did this already and it really worked. It helped him be more successful in the area of math. We tried this and it just didn't work when he was learning his vowel sounds. Is there something that you've done at home, and you can bring the parent in, that helped your child remember things they have to do in order or in sequential order? And maybe they can give you some ideas. We have to remember that they are their child's parent that puts them to sleep every night and is aware of certain things that we may not see when we have 20-some other kids in the classroom. Then brainstorm together with the parent. What could we do to help the child in his or her weaknesses? Make a list of them. That's not going to work. I don't see him being able to work with another child right now. Just thinking off the top of my head. But make a list of those things. And then discuss grades. Don't let grades be the first thing. The parent should know how their child is doing grade-wise because of technology. The minute you put a grade in, it goes straight to the parent, and they will have their averages for all the subjects. But it's an important part, but it's not the most important part. Then, in order for all the things that we've decided we're going to try, how much time are we going to give it before we meet again? And how are we going to meet again? Are we going to do it by email or by phone? Or do we think we need to come in person again? Are we going to give it a week? Are we going to give it 2 weeks or a month? Depending upon what it is we're trying, we might need to give it some extra time in order to see if it's going to be a positive influence on the child's learning. Then everyone has to sign the template. So the parent will sign it, the teacher will sign it, and everyone will get a copy of it so that the parent can take it home to maybe the grandparent who lives with them who didn't come to the conference. They can see what we talked about. And as long as it's signed, then everybody that was at the conference can say, yeah, we talked about this on April 12th. Remember, and you signed it. So there's some legality there, and it helps everyone stay on the same page. And then, of course, you thank them for coming in, end on a positive note, letting them know you appreciate the communication that we have together. But then if we come over here, it's important to invite other professionals into the conference if need be. Maybe there's a significant medical issue where the nurse could be there and invited. Maybe there's an emotional issue and you want to have the school counselor there. Maybe they're excelling really well in gym class or art, and you want to have those two teachers there where you can implement something in art to help the child in math, or I'm just thinking off the cuff right now. But invite the people that you think are important in the classroom and let the parent know they're going to be there so they don't feel uncomfortable when they first walk in the room and see more than just the teacher there. Okay? But never, ever suggest a medical issue during a meeting. You may have an idea that this child has a listening or focusing problem. You can give some observations of, Johnny not being able to sit still for more than 1 minute without moving around. I have to allow Johnny to stand during my lecture in class because he does better standing. You can give those type of observations, but don't ever say, I think your child has ADHD. That's a medical issue and you're not a doctor. You can be sued for that. Their school can be sued for that. So be very, very careful that you are only talking about academics in a parent-teacher conference. It's important to have all the components within a lesson plan template. This template has changed from year to year, so be mindful that this is what I'm asking you to do, and hopefully it will look something like this in the future, but it is a working document, so to speak. So number one, you want to have the topic. Say it's the rainforest. Number two will be the subject, science. Maybe you're going to have more than one subject. Maybe it will be science and language arts because they'll be writing, or science and art because they're going to create a rainforest. Number three, standard. So you go to the Pennsylvania Department of Education website and find the standard that would best suit the science and the topic of a rainforest. And then you would list it there, the number and the explanation or description of the standard. Try to have only one standard. There's many standards that you'll be hitting, but or one standard per subject that you're going to do within that same lesson at least, because there's one thing you want them to take away, and maybe it will be the layers of the forest. Maybe it will be how the rainforest helps us live. The objective, coming to it right now, what is it you want them to learn and take away with them when they leave the classroom? Essential questions. Remembering you're going to want them to think deeper, so you're asking questions like, why are there animals in the rainforest that depend on the trees? Words compare and contrast a rainforest to our borough in New Wilmington. Vocabulary, maybe it will be the canopy, the emergent layer, the understory, words that would describe the different layers of the rainforest that you're going to want to teach the kids so that they understand your objective. The duration of the entire lesson, is it going to be 40 minutes, 50 minutes? That might change. But if you have some knowledge that you want it to be around 40 minutes, then you're going to be mindful of it's going to be around that time. It might be less, it might be more. Suggested instructional strategies. That means, how's the room going to be set up? Are you going to have them in pods? Are you going to do lecture style? Are you going to have the kids working independently by themselves? Are you going to have them working in pairs, doing pair share? Are you going to have them work in a large group? Or maybe you're going to be doing a little bit of all of that. And that makes a great lesson when a child has to work by him or herself, then in pairs, and then in a small group, and then return to a large group. Wow. Instructional procedure with time allotments. Everything you're going to do in the lesson. Back in the day, we used to have, what will the teacher do? What will the student do? And that made for a very long, involved lesson plan. But if you could just give me number one, rainforest music and scenes of the rainforest will be playing when the kids enter the classroom on the smart board, and put 3 minutes next to it. Okay, and then the next one, introduce the target and read the schedule for the day. Have a student volunteer read the schedule. 2 minutes. Put an allotment next to each one so you have some idea how fast and slow you want things to go in order to make that duration come true. All right? Adapts and modifications. What are you going to have to do for different types of learners in the classroom? Are you going to have to make things larger for a child who has visual impairments? Are you going to have a certain person sitting in a certain place because of hearing issues? Are you going to have a different assessment for different levels of kids within the classroom? Adapts and mods are important to list. And then finally, related instructional materials. I have talked about this in other videos where you might be reflecting on your lesson while you're teaching it and you're saying, this is going south big time. You're going to need to pull some things out of your related materials that you have already put in there that you can bring to life. Maybe it's a different video that will explain one of the vocabulary words that the kids are having trouble with. So have them ready to go in case they are needed. So these are the components of the lesson plan template that I would like you to use in educational psychology. We have some ticket outs that you'll be responsible for answering at the end of a classroom lesson or by the end of the day at 11:59. And they go with the reading in the textbooks that you are assigned to read. Why have a framework? We're speaking of the domains now. So if you're thinking about domain 1 being planning and preparation, domain 2 being classroom environment, domain 3 being instruction, and the final domain of professionalism, why do we have these? Well, we have them so that they can be applied in any situation. If I'm teaching first grade, I can still use the same domains that a 12th grade teacher will use. So it's a framework that's universal. Okay, and can be used with any type of curriculum and any age level of teaching. How is teaching demanding? Teaching is demanding in 3 ways. It's demanding cognitively because we are teaching all through our day, and sometimes the curriculum changes. My easiest example is the planets, and how one planet is no longer a planet. So we have to be mindful that some of our songs that we might sing to teach the planets will no longer be ones that we can apply and use in the classroom. So it's very cognitively demanding. It's also emotionally demanding because things happen to our children and our students that are very hard for us to turn off at the end of the day and not bring home with us. Maybe it's someone who's being molested. Maybe it's an alcoholic parent. Maybe it's the loss of a parent or even a pet. These are things that are very instrumental into the emotional part of bringing a child into the academic setting, but also helping them become a whole person. And that's when we become an advocate for that child. So it can be cognitively demanding and emotionally demanding, and it's physically demanding. I'm playing with them out at recess. I'm sitting on the floor and getting back up. I'm doing handstands. I'm doing cartwheels. I'm doing whatever I can to make learning successful and engaging for that child. Think of how many questions a teacher answers within an hour. You know, can I go to the bathroom to, what are you trying to tell me here? Things that might be deeper, but there are so many questions that they answer throughout the day that can be very draining. So it's very demanding. What does the teacher need to know about the students prior to planning? What are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? Go to their file, go to their past teacher, go to a counselor, go to their special teachers. Do they excel in art but are having trouble in social studies? So are you going to be able to use art in your social studies class for that child in order for that child to do well in social studies? Learn about their culture, learn about their families. learn about anything that would be an interest to them, so that you have literature in the room that will engage the child and want to learn. And if they see that you are taking an interest in their interests, I think they're going to be wanting to develop more of a rapport and respect with you. Explain the difference between the two Civil War plans. Within our reading, you're going to see a teacher who stands in front of class and tells you what happens in the Civil War. When did it start? When did it end? Who was the president? Where did it end? What was the last battle? Then there's another teacher who asks the children in that classroom to write a letter home to their parent as a soldier in the last battle of the Civil War, and what they are experiencing. Are they having to walk over some other fellow soldiers that have been killed? What are they feeling? And put the date at the top so you know when it's been written and so forth. Which one do you think is more memorable and more meaningful? It's up for you to decide. Instruction can't just be fun. Explain. So you want to make sure that instruction is meaningful first, and then it should be fun. The example of the Civil War. Is it really fun to memorize dates? I don't want to say it's fun to write a letter as someone who's vicariously been placed into the boots of a soldier, but I do think it's more meaningful, and it does make it memorable and hopefully fun along the way. What are the strategies that hinder behavioral issues? Remember, if you have taken an interest in your student and they have literature in the room that they will be interested in picking up and reading during silent reading, that's hindering some bad behavior. Remembering to establish some routine where there is a schedule at the board every single day, and the child will know that he or she has to read it, and this is what my expectations will be for me to be a successful learner that day. Being a teacher who's at the door to greet them and shake their hand, that is developing some respect and rapport and limiting some hindered behavior, some bad behavior. Perhaps having rules in the classroom that they have written themselves. If they are writing the rules with you, they have some ownership, and it makes them want to follow through with the rules. And when they do break the rule, make sure that you are following through with the correct discipline that you have told them ahead of time. This is going to happen if you do this. Why is knowing your students important? Of course, we've talked about that in the past with some of these other questions, but knowing your students too from their home life. Know where they're coming from. If you see them coming down the hallway with their head down like this, if you see them falling asleep in the classroom, something's happened at home the night before, right? And you have to know that from the child. Do you know their economic standing at home? Are they going to need food? Are they going to need supplies? Are they going to need clothing? Perhaps they're even going to need to have their gas tank filled. Maybe they're going to need help with electricity bills. And you can find ways to support that family so that you know your child inside and out, not just academically. Explain how Dewey changed education. We've talked about it. Now you need to know that he was progressive and child-centered and be able to explain those two things, that he did away with Little House on the Prairie and started having kids in pods, and the teacher was a facilitator and the kids were learning from their peers. And child-centered or child interests are incorporated in the classroom. How does Montessori incorporate the senses? Sense of touch with using sandpaper or sand in a sandbox in order to form the letters or the math facts, using a sense of smell when they are cooking, using a sense of eyes, everything being at eye level so that they can see what's most important in the classroom. How did she incorporate the 5 senses? Who is most influential of each stage of Erickson? Knowing that it's mom or grandma or dad, that one person, and then adding one more person to the second stage, mom, dad, or grandma, grandpa, or mom and grandma. Whoever that second person is that's living in the same home, that's an adult that you're going to add to the second stage. Then the entire family. Then the neighborhood and teachers, then the peers and role models, then your partner for life, then your colleagues, and then finally yourself. You're reflecting on your life from the age 65 till death. Those are important for Erickson. I want you to be able to explain egocentrism, object permanence, and zone of proximity through the Piaget method and the Vygotsky method. So those are some ticket outs that you're going to have to answer, and I hope some of the information I just gave you will be helpful in your answering.